The ballroom went silent the second Marcus Hale pointed at her. 300 donors, tuxedos and champagne glasses frozen mid-air, watched as the famous motivational speaker laughed into his microphone and called the quiet nurse in the corner, "Just another forgettable caregiver." The woman didn't flinch, didn't blink, just lowered her eyes the way she always did, like someone who had learned long ago that invisibility was armor. Nobody saw her fingers go still. Nobody noticed the way she clocked every exit in under 4 seconds. Then the emergency doors at the far end of the corridor exploded open, and a man soaked in blood collapsed onto the marble floor, one shaking hand reaching toward her. His mouth formed 4 words before his eyes rolled back. "Your father sent me." If this story already has your heart hammering, you're exactly where we want you. Hit that subscribe button right now and follow this channel so you never miss what comes next. Because the stories we tell here don't slow down. They only get more intense. Drop a like if this got you, and leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning, because nothing about this night started the way anyone expected. The invitation had said business casual, which was the first sign that whoever planned the Hargrove Foundation Gala had never actually been inside Maplewood Veterans Medical Center on a Tuesday afternoon. Business casual didn't mean much when your Tuesday afternoon involved a 67-year-old man screaming through a wound debridement, or a double amputee learning to transfer himself from wheelchair to bed for the 14th time in a row because he wasn't going to stop until he got it right. Nora Voss had not wanted to come. She had said so, twice, to her floor supervisor, Janet Briggs, who had smiled the way Janet always smiled when she had already made a decision and was only going through the motions of consulting other people. "It's a donor gala," Janet had said. "The foundation writes checks that keep this wing running. We send 3 nurses, we smile, we thank the right people, and we leave by 9. "I have a 6 a.m. shift." "Everyone has a 6 a.m. shift, Nora." That had been the end of the conversation. So Nora stood now near the far wall of the Hargrove Grand Ballroom in downtown Kellerton, Colorado, holding a glass of sparkling water she hadn't touched, wearing the one dark blazer she owned, watching 300 people in formal wear congratulate each other on their generosity. The room smelled like expensive cologne and warm bread rolls and something floral she couldn't identify. The ceiling was vaulted, hung with cascading lights that probably cost more than her monthly take-home. A string quartet played something she didn't know near the entrance. She had positioned herself with her back to a load-bearing column, sight-lined to both the main ballroom doors and the service exit near the kitchen. Old habit. She'd stopped noticing she did it years ago. Donna Reyes, one of the 2 other nurses who'd come from the medical center, materialized at her elbow with a small plate of appetizers. Donna was easy to like, loud, warm, the kind of person who remembered every patient's birthday and cried at every discharge. "You look like you're planning an escape route," Donna said. "I'm just standing here." "You've moved twice in the last 20 minutes to maintain a clear line to the door." Nora looked at her. "The room is crowded." Donna offered her a crab puff. "Relax. Eat something. These are genuinely good." Nora took it, ate it in one bite because it was easier than arguing, and looked back at the room. At the center of it, near the main stage, a cluster of people orbited a man the way iron filings arranged themselves around a magnet. Not because they wanted to, necessarily, but because the field was strong enough that resisting it took more effort than most people were willing to spend. Marcus Hale. She knew the name. Everyone in the room knew the name. He had 3 best-selling books, a podcast with 8 million subscribers, and a speaking fee that Nora suspected exceeded her annual salary. He was broad-shouldered and photogenic, with the kind of easy confidence that looked natural until you watched him work a room long enough to see the mechanics underneath. He touched shoulders. He laughed at exactly the right volume. He remembered the names of people he'd met twice and used them like gifts. He was, in the language of people who studied such things, very good at what he did. What he did, as far as Nora could tell, was talk about courage without ever having been in a situation that required it. She pulled her attention away and checked her phone. 7:43. Janet had said 9. That was 77 more minutes. The program began at 8, a series of brief remarks from Foundation board members, a video about the work Maplewood Veterans Medical Center did for returning service members, and then Marcus Hale, who was the evening's keynote speaker, and clearly its main attraction. Nora found a seat near the back and settled in. keeping her blazer on because the room's air conditioning was set for people who'd arrived in fur stoles. The video was good, genuinely good. It showed the physical therapy wing, the occupational therapy team, a Marine named Roland who had come in 14 months ago unable to walk and was shown at the end of the clip standing on a running track with prosthetics, grinning at the camera like a man who had decided to enjoy the joke the universe had played on him. Nora had been in the room during 3 of Roland's worst sessions. She had not found those sessions cinematic, but the video caught something true about the place, and she felt the complicated pride that came with it, the kind that doesn't quite feel like pride because it's cut through with too much of everything else. Applause. Then Marcus Hale took the stage. He was good. She had to give him that. He knew how to build a room, how to let silence do work, how to drop a phrase and then pause just long enough for it to settle. He told a story about visiting a veterans hospital once, she noted the word once, and being moved by what he saw. He talked about resilience, about the invisible strength that lived in ordinary people. The room leaned toward him the way rooms did. And then, somewhere around the 20-minute mark, he made a gesture toward the audience and said, "The real heroes in this room tonight aren't the donors, though we are deeply grateful." Light laughter. They're the caregivers, the nurses, the aides, the people who show up every single day and give everything they have. He meant it to land as praise. What happened next was something else. His gaze swept the room in that practiced way, and it snagged on Nora. Sitting in her dark blazer at the back, arms folded, not applauding, her face arranged in the careful neutral that was simply how her face rested at this point in her life. "Like this woman right here," he said, pointing. "Tell me, what's your name?" The spotlight, an actual spotlight operated by someone in a booth above the ballroom, swung to her. Every head turned. Nora felt her jaw tighten by 1 millimeter. "Nora Voss." "Nora," he smiled. "What do you do at Maplewood?" "Trauma and acute care nursing." "Beautiful." He said it like a word that meant something. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly what I mean. Just another ordinary caregiver, doing the quiet work, the invisible work." He looked at her with something that he probably thought was warmth. "We see you, Nora." Just another ordinary caregiver. She registered the phrase the way you registered a sound that wasn't quite right. Not with anger, not immediately, just with a kind of flat noting. The room applauded. Donna, somewhere to her left, made a face that Nora didn't look at directly. "Thank you," Nora said, because it was the only thing that closed the moment cleanly. Marcus Hale moved on. The spotlight moved with him. Nora unfolded her arms and set them in her lap and looked at the table in front of her. She had been called worse things. She had been called worse things by people who were actively trying to wound her, which Marcus Hale was not. He was simply someone who had looked at her and seen exactly what she had spent 3 years making sure people would see. She should not be bothered by this. She was a little bothered by this. Not because of the words. Because of how precisely they fit. 3 years in Kellerton, Colorado. 3 years at Maplewood Veterans Medical Center, where she had deliberately taken the quietest floor, avoided the cases that would draw attention, kept her head down and her instincts buried under the 12 layers of restraint she'd built for herself like sediment, each one deposited slowly, over months, by the decision to stop being the person she used to be. It had worked. It had worked so completely that on nights like this one, in rooms like this one, she was invisible. She was just another ordinary caregiver. She drank her sparkling water. The program wrapped up. The ballroom shifted from formal program to cocktail hour and small group conversation, and Nora recalculated her exit options. She could leave now, at 7 minutes past 9, and tell Janet she'd stayed for the keynote as requested. That was technically accurate. She was 3 steps from the service exit when Donna caught her arm. "He's doing a meet and greet by the stage. I thought we were supposed to—" "You go," Nora said. "I'll tell Janet you represented the floor beautifully." "Nora, I'm not upset, Donna. I'm just tired." Donna held her eyes for a moment with the particular look she got sometimes. The one that said, "I think there's more going on with you than you let on," and then let her go. Nora was almost at the exit door. She had one hand on the push bar when she heard it. Not heard, felt. The concussive bang of heavy doors being forced open, then the particular clatter of a body hitting a hard floor, And then a sound she had not heard in 3 years and 4 months that bypassed every rational thought and landed somewhere below her sternum like a dropped weight. A man's voice, strained to its last reserves, calling out words that didn't belong in this ballroom, in this city, in this version of her life. She turned. At the far end of the corridor beyond the ballroom's main entrance, visible through the open double doors, a man was on the floor. Big, dressed in civilian clothes that were soaked through with blood. Not fresh bleeding, layered, hours old and new, mixed together in the way she knew from experience meant multiple wounds across multiple hours. He'd come a long distance in this condition. Whatever had kept him moving this long was the same thing that had used itself up entirely getting him here. He was looking at her. In a room of 300 people, across 40 feet of marble flooring and 2 sets of doors, he was looking directly at her. "Help him," someone said behind her, in the vague way that people said help him when they meant someone else should help him. Nora was already moving. She crossed the ballroom floor at a pace that wasn't quite running. Not because she was restraining herself, but because she was already running internal calculations that told her running wasn't the most efficient motion here, that she needed her hands free and her breathing controlled and her mind clear when she reached him. She unhooked the decorative rope barrier near the corridor in entrance without slowing down and went to her knees beside him before the nearest security guard had finished deciding whether to move. Up close he was worse. Late 30s, heavy build that had gone lean with blood loss. A makeshift field dressing on his left side that someone, possibly him, had packed with what appeared to be a shirt, and a second wound on his right thigh that had been tourniquet-wrapped with a belt, but was seeping around the edges in a way that meant the tourniquet had been applied too long ago or not correctly. His skin was the gray-white of serious shock. His pulse, when she pressed 2 fingers to his neck, was fast and shallow and wrong. "What's your name?" she said. His eyes found her face. The thing in them was not panic. It was relief, which told her he'd known who he was looking for. "Doesn't matter," he said. "It matters to me. What's your name?" "Garrett." A breath. "Garrett Mills." "Okay, Garrett. I'm Nora. You're going to stay with me." She looked up. A hotel security guard stood 2 feet away, frozen in the useful way that untrained people froze. "You. Radio for an ambulance right now. Tell them GSW. 2 wounds, patient in hemorrhagic shock. We need a trauma team." She looked back down the corridor. "Somebody bring me a first aid kit. The real one, not the Band-Aid box. The actual trauma kit from the emergency station by the kitchen. Move." "Ma'am, I don't know if we should—" "I'm a trauma nurse." She said it flatly, not as a credential, but as a simple statement of fact. "Go." People moved. Not everyone, but enough. Donna appeared at the edge of her peripheral vision, already pulling up the emergency number on her phone, reading the address off the placard by the door, with the clear, calm voice of someone who'd called in emergencies before. Nora worked. She got 2 fingers under the tourniquet on the thigh and checked the placement, found it wrong. Too distal, barely compressing the femoral, and repositioned it with the materials available, using the belt itself and the plastic rod from a hotel emergency kit someone shoved into her hand 60 seconds in. She repacked the side wound with the proper gauze from the same kit, applied direct pressure, talked to Garrett through all of it in the low, even voice she used when she needed a patient to stay conscious through something that hurt. "You're doing good. Keep breathing. I need you to stay right here with me." "You're her," he said. It came out between controlled breaths the way words came when someone was allocating oxygen carefully. "Nora Voss. It's you." She kept her hands where they were. "You need to save your breath. Came looking for you, specifically." Another breath. "Spent 11 days getting here." She looked at him then, really looked, at the set of his jaw, at the particular way he was managing his own pain, the deliberate breath pattern, the positioning of his hands even now, even on the floor of a hotel corridor, bleeding out in front of 300 strangers. She had seen that pattern before. She had been trained in it. It was not a civilian technique. "Who sent you?" she said quietly. Not a question exactly. His eyes stayed steady on hers. Your father sent me." The words went through her like cold water. She did not react. She had trained herself not to react to things that hit that particular nerve, the one connected to a name she hadn't said out loud in 3 years, to a life she had dismantled and buried in Kellerton, Colorado, with great care and no small amount of grief. Her hands kept moving. The pressure on the wound held. "You need to stay conscious," she said. "He said you'd say that." Her jaw tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means he knew you." Another breath, harder. "Knew you'd keep working instead of asking questions. Said to tell you." He coughed, controlled it. "Said to tell you it wasn't your fault. That what happened to the unit, it wasn't you." The ballroom noise behind her had changed. The string quartet had stopped. The murmur of 300 guests had shifted into something quieter and closer, the magnetic pull of an emergency drawing people toward it, even when they didn't know what they were watching. She was aware distantly of Marcus Hale's voice somewhere in the crowd. Something about clearing space, about giving the woman room, performed helpfulness, the kind that photographed well. "Tell me later," she said to Garrett. "Right now, you're going to breathe and stay with me." "There isn't later." His hand moved, found her wrist, gripped it with the remaining strength of a man who'd been strong enough to carry whatever he was carrying 11 days across, wherever he'd come from. "They're already moving. Whatever they're planning, it moves tonight. I have—" He stopped. "Inside left pocket. Don't let them take it." "Who's them?" "You'll know when they get here." Sirens in the distance. EMS maybe 6 minutes out. The makeshift tourniquet was holding. The side wound was packed. His pressure was bad, but not unsurvivable, if the ambulance made its window. She ran the math in her head the way she always did, automatically, the clinical calculus of damage and time and intervention. He was going to survive this, unless something else went wrong in the next 6 minutes. She became aware of the shift in the room before she had a visual reason for it. Not sound, exactly. A change in the quality of attention around her, the way a crowd reorients when something happens at its edge. She looked up. Marcus Hale was standing 4 feet away, and beside him was a hotel manager and one of the foundation board members, and the 3 of them were watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize. "Is she a doctor?" the board member said, to no one in particular. "She's a nurse," Donna said from somewhere behind him. There was an edge in her voice that Nora had never heard from Donna before. Hale looked at Nora. Something in his face had changed. Not guilt, not quite, more like the expression of a man who had made a confident statement in public and was now watching the evidence arrange itself against him in front of witnesses. "I think we should let the paramedics," he started. "The paramedics aren't here yet." Nora didn't look at him. Her hand stayed on Garrett. "He would have been dead in 4 minutes without intervention. The paramedics will be here in 4 minutes. You do the math." Silence. Then Garrett's grip on her wrist tightened. "Left pocket," he said again, and this time there was urgency in it. Not the urgency of a man worried about his own survival, but of a man who had accepted that as a secondary concern. "Before anyone else gets their hands on it, please." She looked at him. He looked back. She reached into his jacket with her free hand, the one not maintaining pressure, and found it. A sealed waterproof case, the kind that came from military surplus, palm-sized, hard-shelled. She didn't open it. She moved it to the inside pocket of her own blazer in one motion that looked, to anyone watching, like she was adjusting her position over the patient. The sirens got louder. "Nora." Donna appeared at her shoulder, voice low. "EMS is outside. Tell them hemorrhagic shock, 2 GSWs, femoral compression in place, abdominal pack applied approximately 9 minutes ago. Systolic is dropping." She rattled off the rest of the handoff information in the 30 seconds she had before the paramedics came through the door, standing and stepping back to give them room, watching with the critical eye of someone who'd handed off 1,000 patients and was already calculating whether this team was going to be good enough. They were. She relaxed 1 degree. Garrett's eyes found her one more time as they loaded him onto the stretcher. They asked her something she couldn't quite name. Not a question, exactly. More like a confirmation. "You know now. You understand what this is." She turned. The ballroom had mostly emptied into the corridor. 300 people in evening wear pressed against the walls in a loose semicircle, watching her with the particular look that emergency situations produced, part shock, part fascination, part the slightly shameful relief of people who had been frightened by something that had ultimately happened to someone else. She was aware of what she looked like. She had blood on her hands, literally, and the blazer that was her only good one was ruined, and she was standing in the middle of a charity gala corridor, having just performed a femoral tourniquet repositioning and a wound pack on a floor that cost more per square foot than her car. She was also aware that Marcus Hale was directly in front of her. He opened his mouth. Whatever he planned to say, she didn't hear it. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A number she didn't recognize, but the area code she did. She'd spent years making sure she didn't recognize numbers with that area code. She had deleted every contact, changed her own number twice, moved twice, and built a life in Kellerton, Colorado that was specifically designed to make calls from that area code impossible. She looked at the screen for a long moment. Then she picked up. Silence on the other end. Then a voice she would have known anywhere. A voice she had not let herself imagine in 3 years, because imagining it meant allowing the possibility of loss and confirmation of loss, and she had not been ready for either. But it wasn't that voice. It was a voice she didn't know, male, clipped and professional in the way that very few voices were. Sergeant First Class Nora Voss, it said. Not was. Not formerly. Present tense. We need you to not leave that building, it said. We're 12 minutes out. The line went dead. She stood in the corridor of the Hargrove Grand Ballroom, blood drying on her hands, 300 people watching her, and she felt the familiar thing rising in her chest. Not quite fear, not quite recognition. The thing that came when a situation you had believed was finished revealed itself to be ongoing. The sealed case in her blazer pocket pressed against her ribs. 11 days, Garrett had said. He had traveled 11 days to bring her something and to find her specifically, in a city she'd chosen because it was quiet, in a life she'd chosen because it was forgettable. Your father sent me. She looked at the corridor. She looked at the emergency doors, still swinging lightly on their hinges where Garrett had come through them. 12 minutes. Whatever had been finished was not finished. Whatever she had walked away from had, apparently, not walked away from her. 12 minutes felt like nothing and like everything at the same time. Nora pocketed her phone and stood still for 3 full seconds in the corridor. Not because she was frozen, but because she was making decisions, and making them badly would cost more time than taking them correctly costs now. The sealed case pressed against her left side. Garrett was already through the service entrance with the EMS crew, their voices fading down the loading ramp toward the ambulance bay. The ballroom crowd had started to thin, guests peeling away in pairs and small groups, the event's formal program now irrecoverably broken. She needed to think. She needed space to think, which the corridor was not providing. Nora. Donna was beside her again, and the look on her face had moved past concern into something closer to controlled alarm. What was that? Who was he? A patient. He wasn't your patient. He wasn't anyone's patient. He walked in off the street. He's my patient now. She looked at Donna directly. I need you to do something for me. Go to the EMS rig before it leaves. Tell them the patient specifically requested his care be transferred to Maplewood Veterans Medical Center, not Kellerton General. Maplewood. Use my name if they push back. Donna stared at her. Why does that matter? Because it matters. Please. Something in Nora's voice landed, and Donna, who was perceptive enough to understand when a conversation had moved outside the territory she fully understood, gave a short nod and went. Nora turned and walked back into the ballroom, moving against the current of departing guests, and found the corner she'd been standing in at the start of the evening. She needed a wall at her back and a clear line to the entrance. The habits were already running without her permission. She pulled the waterproof case from her pocket and turned it over in her hands. Sealed. Rubberized gasket around the edge, the kind rated to 30 meters. A thumb latch on one end. She didn't open it. Not here, not in front of whatever was left of this crowd, not until she understood more about who was 12 minutes away and what they wanted from her. Your father sent me. She let herself sit with that for exactly the amount of time she could afford, which was about 4 seconds, And then she put it in a box and closed the lid and moved on, because that was how she had survived the last 3 years, and presumably how she was going to survive the next 12 minutes. "You're remarkably calm." Marcus Hale. She should have expected him. He'd drifted over with the particular persistence of a man who was not accustomed to not being the most compelling person in a room and had just watched that status reorganize itself without his consent. She looked at him. "I'm not calm. I'm focused. They're different things." He absorbed that. Up close, away from the stage lighting, he looked less like a keynote speaker and more like a man who was trying to recalibrate something he hadn't expected to need to recalibrate. "Where did you learn to do that?" "Do what?" "All of it." He gestured vaguely in the direction of the corridor. "The tourniquet. The way you were talking to him. You knew exactly what you were doing. That wasn't just nursing." "Trauma nursing is exactly what that was." "I've seen trauma nurses work. That was something else." She looked at the entrance of the ballroom. Still no one coming through it who fit the profile she was running in her head. Plain clothes, military bearing, the particular way people moved when they were operating rather than attending an event. "Mr. Hale, I don't think this is a conversation that needs to happen tonight. I said something tonight that It's fine." "It isn't, actually." He stopped, started again. "I called you ordinary, in front of everyone, and then you went and did—" He stopped again. She got the impression that Marcus Hale was not frequently at a loss for words and was finding the experience disorienting. "I owe you an apology." She looked at him then, really looked, and found something surprising in his face, which was that the apology appeared to be genuine. Not performance, not reputation management, not the careful public contrition of someone worried about optics. Just a man who had been wrong about something and knew it. It didn't make her feel the way she might have expected 2 hours ago, before Garrett Mills had come through the emergency doors and said what he said. "I appreciate that," she said, "but right now I need you to go home." He blinked. "Excuse me?" "You and everyone still in this building who doesn't work here. Go home. Go to your hotel. The gala is over." She said it without authority she didn't technically have, and he seemed to understand that, but she also said it in the voice that she used when a situation required a specific thing to happen and social niceties were a secondary concern, and apparently that voice still worked on people regardless of context. He left. She was almost alone in the ballroom, a few catering staff clearing tables at the far end, the hotel manager hovering near the kitchen entrance looking like a man who was going to need to write a very unusual incident report. Outside, through the tall windows along the west wall, she could see the ambulance pulling away from the loading dock. No lights, which meant stable transport. Garrett was alive and moving. She put the case back in her pocket and waited. They came through the main entrance at 11 minutes, which meant they'd been moving faster than the estimate or had already been closer. 4 of them. Civilian clothes. That part had been accurate. But the clothes sat wrong on them, the way clothes always sat wrong on people who were accustomed to wearing something else. 3 men and a woman, ranging from late 30s to early 50s, and they moved through the emptying ballroom with the coordinated awareness of people who had done room entries before and were managing not to look like it. The woman reached her first, compact, dark-haired, with the kind of face that gave nothing away without having been trained to give nothing away. She stopped at a respectful distance and said, "Sergeant First Class Voss." "I've been out 3 years," Nora said. "The rank doesn't expire." She didn't offer a hand. "Special Agent Dana Thrall, DIA. We spoke on the phone." "You told me not to leave the building." "You didn't. Thank you." Thrall glanced at the waterproof case that Nora had moved to her jacket pocket, but that was visible as a slight outline. He made contact. He made more than contact. He nearly died in the hallway. He knew that was a likely outcome when he left Maryland 11 days ago. Thrall said it without apparent emotion, the way you said things that were true and painful when the painful part had already been processed, and what remained was just the true part. He's a stubborn man. Is he going to make it? If the surgical team at Maplewood is as good as the reputation says, yes. She paused. That was your doing, routing him there. He would have gone to Kellerton General otherwise. They don't have the right protocols for his injury profile. Thrall looked at her for a moment with an expression that was difficult to read. "You haven't changed," she said. "Not warmly, not critically, just observationally." "I've changed considerably." Nora looked past her at the three others, who had spread to casual positions around the perimeter of the room in a way that was not casual at all. "What do you need from me, Agent Thrall?" "What's in the case?" "I haven't opened it." "I know, that was correct." Thrall reached into her jacket and produced her credentials. DIA, legitimate, the kind that had the specific weight and finish that Nora knew from years of working alongside people who carried them. "The case contains documentation and digital media that Mills transported out of a secure facility in the DC area at considerable personal risk. We need to verify it's intact before we can brief you on the full scope." "Then verify it." "We need to do that off-site. There are reasons we can't do it here." Thrall stopped, chose her next words with care. "There are also reasons we specifically need you to be present when we do." Nora looked at her. "What reasons?" Thrall didn't answer immediately. She had the manner of someone who was deciding how much to say, not because she was hiding things strategically, but because she was calculating how much information a person could usefully receive at once and sequencing accordingly. It was a manner Nora recognized. She had been trained by people who operated the same way. "Your father," Thrall said. "The box. The lid." She held them both shut. "My father died 3 years ago," Nora said. "A training accident, classified." "He died. That part is accurate." A pause. "The rest of it is what we need to talk about." The catering staff at the far end of the room had stopped clearing tables. They were doing the thing people did when they were pretending not to listen, moving without purpose, the small betrayals of attention that trained observers spotted immediately. Thrall's people had noticed too. 2 of them shifted position fractionally. "There's a private meeting space on the 2nd floor," the hotel manager said from the kitchen doorway. Nora had forgotten he was there. "I can clear it." No one had asked him, but the offer was useful, and accepting it took 30 seconds. And 2 minutes later, Nora was sitting at a conference table on the 2nd floor with Thrall across from her and 2 of the others positioned at the door and the window, and the hotel manager pointedly elsewhere. She set the case on the table. "Open it," Thrall said. Nora flipped the thumb latch and opened it. Inside, set in custom foam, was a USB drive, a micro SD card sealed in an evidence bag, and a folded piece of paper. Not printed, handwritten, in small, precise block letters, on what appeared to be a torn piece of notebook paper. The handwriting hit her before the words did. She had grown up watching that handwriting on grocery lists and birthday cards and notes left on the kitchen counter. She would have known it in any context. She unfolded the paper. "Nora, what you were told was a lie. Rennick built it. Everything is on the drive. Mills knows the rest. I'm sorry I couldn't come myself. Do what you always did. Finish the mission." She read it twice. Then she set it down on the table, face up, and looked at it for a moment. "Rennick," she said. Thrall nodded. "Warren Rennick." "Yes, Warren Rennick. Defense contractor, DOD, advisory board member, the kind of man whose name appeared in procurement documents and budget hearings, and not in headlines, because men like Rennick were very careful about headlines. She had met him once, briefly, at a debrief following a mission in which 3 members of her unit had come home in transfer cases, and the 4th had come home with injuries that had medically separated him from service 6 months later. Rennick had been in the room as a DOD observer. He had taken notes and asked measured questions and shaken hands and left. She had not thought about Warren Rennick in 3 years. She had thought, without the name, about what had happened to her unit, about the after-action reports that didn't add up, about the classified determination of operator error that had ended her career and the careers of everyone who survived and the lives of everyone who hadn't. She had thought about it constantly and painfully for the first year, and deliberately not at all for the 2 years after that, because it was the only way to function. "How long have you known?" she asked. "We've suspected Rennick's involvement for 14 months, Thrall said. "We've had evidence we could act on for 6 days. A pause. "The reason we couldn't act sooner is that we didn't have what's on that drive. We had the outline of it. Mills has spent the better part of a year getting us the substance." "Why Mills?" "He served with your father. Unit before yours. Thrall looked at the note on the table. When your father understood what had really happened to your team. And when he understood that the official finding was going to stand unless someone broke it from inside, he went to the one person he trusted. Nora was quiet. Your father spent 2 years building the case from inside a contractor facility where Rennick had connections. He got sick 8 months ago. Thrall stopped. He didn't tell you because he knew you'd come home. He knew you'd insert yourself into an active investigation and either compromise it or get killed. He knew me, Nora said. He knew you. She looked at the USB drive and its foam cutout. He's gone. Yes. Before he could see this happen. Yes. A pause, and something passed across Thrall's face that might have been the nearest thing to softness the woman allowed herself. I'm sorry. Nora nodded once. The box was still closed and the lid was still holding, and she was going to let it hold until she had the privacy to take it off, which was not now. What do you need from me? She said again. Your testimony. Your after-action recollection about the mission parameters you were given versus what actually happened on the ground. Your unit's communication logs, if you retained any copies. Thrall's eyes were level. And your identification of the discrepancies in the official report, the ones you noticed at the time but had no standing to challenge. I had standing. I was told I didn't. That's part of what we're correcting. Nora looked at the folded note. Finish the mission. Her father had known, apparently, exactly what message would work on her. He had known it well enough to write it down in a corridor of a D.C. area facility while he was dying and hand it to Garrett Mills to carry 11 days across the country. She was angry about that, in the particular way that you could be angry at someone you loved who was gone, which was not a useful kind of anger, and she pushed it down to deal with later. I'll need to see what's on the drive first, she said. Understood. Thrall reached for her laptop. What happened next was 70 minutes of the most concentrated reading and reviewing Nora had done in 3 years. The drive contained documents, procurement communications, budget transfers, encrypted message logs that DIA's technical team had already decoded, that told a story she recognized from the inside, from the ground-level perspective of someone who had lived its consequences without understanding its architecture. The mission that had killed 4 of her teammates and ended her career had not been operator error. It had been a deliberately compromised intelligence package. The coordinates they'd been given were off. The communication support they'd been promised had been quietly withdrawn 48 hours before they deployed, without their knowledge and without any change to the mission profile. Someone had authorized those changes, someone with access to the mission planning systems and the authority to modify packages without triggering standard oversight protocols. The name on the authorization, buried in a procurement subcontract that linked to a DIA access log that linked to a contractor badge number, was not Warren Rennick directly. It never was, with men like Rennick. It was a name she didn't know, attached to a company she didn't know, that traced through 4 layers of contracting relationships back to a parent company that Rennick had founded in 2009 and quietly divested from in 2014, 8 months after her unit's mission. The divestment dated to 3 weeks after the official finding of operator error. He sold the company after the report closed, she said. He sold it and moved the assets to a new entity, Thrall said. The new entity has received 11 contracts from DoD in the last 3 years, totaling approximately $400 million. Nora sat back. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she looked at Thrall. What's his status right now? Rennick? Thrall's jaw tightened slightly. Free. Credentialed. He attended a DoD advisory meeting in Arlington 6 days ago. A pause. He knows Mills went missing from the facility. He has people looking. Looking here? We don't know what he knows about Mills's destination. That's part of why tonight's timeline was what it was. Thrall looked at the 2 agents at the door. We didn't have reason to believe you were exposed until... The agent by the window said, Thrall. His voice had changed. Not loud, quieter actually, in the specific way that trained people got quiet when something required immediate attention. Thrall was on her feet before the word was fully out. Nora was on her feet 2 seconds later, the case closed and back in her pocket by reflex. The agent stepped back from the window. Outside in the parking structure across from the hotel, on the third level, a vehicle had stopped in a position that had no logical explanation given the hour and the event status. Dark SUV, no plates visible from this angle. Its lights were off, but the engine was running. She could see the faint exhaust in the cold air. "How many exits does this building have?" Thrall said, not to Nora. 7, Nora said. "Service entrance on the north side is the only one without camera coverage from the street. Loading dock on the east side has an overhang that blocks sight lines from that parking structure." Thrall looked at her. "I assessed the building when I arrived," Nora said. "I do that." "I know." Thrall was already on her radio, low and fast, the clipped language of someone giving instructions to people positioned elsewhere. Nora caught enough to understand there were more of Thrall's people outside. Not just the 4 who'd come into the ballroom, a larger net that had been positioned around the building while they were upstairs. It should have been reassuring. It wasn't quite, because the SUV and the parking structure hadn't moved. And in Nora's experience, vehicles in surveillance positions only stayed still when they were either about to move or were waiting for something to happen that would tell them when to move. "We need to relocate," Thrall said. "To where?" "We have a vehicle. They're watching the exits." Nora moved to the window, staying to the side of the frame, and looked at the parking structure. At this angle, if someone was in the SUV with optics, they could potentially see this floor. She stepped back. They've had enough time to position more than one. "We don't know how many." "You said Rennick knows Mills went missing from the facility. Mills has been traveling 11 days. 11 days is enough time to run a trace if you have access to the right systems, and a man who has $400 million in DoD contracts has access to the right systems." She looked at Thrall. "If he traced Mills here, he has a team here. He'd send enough to be certain." Thrall was quiet for a beat. The kind of quiet that meant the other person was right, and the acknowledgement of it was going to cost something. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything yet." She looked at the door. "I need to know if Garrett is secure." "He's in transport." "He needs to be more than in transport. If they traced Mills here, they know there was a handoff. They'll go for him next." She crossed to the table and picked up her phone. She had Donna's number. Donna was, presumably, at Maplewood, or heading there. "I'm going to make a call." "Voss?" "If they intercept him before he's in surgery, everything on that drive becomes circumstantial." She looked at Thrall with the flat patience of someone who was doing the math faster than the conversation. "He's a witness. He's the only person alive, other than my father, who can personally connect Rennick to the original authorization. My father is dead. If Garrett Mills dies tonight, what you have is a paper trail that Rennick's lawyers will spend 4 years fragmenting." Thrall stared at her. "So," Nora said, "I need to make a call." She made the call. Donna picked up on the second ring, already at Maplewood, already talking to the surgical coordinator. Nora told her, in terms that were careful and precise and did not explain more than necessary, that the patient needed immediate security notification and that no one without hospital credentials and a name on the surgical team list should have access to the floor he was being taken to. Donna, to her permanent credit, asked 0 clarifying questions and said, "Already on it," and hung up. Nora lowered her phone. The agent at the door said quietly, "Thrall. Second vehicle, street level, north side. 2 vehicles. The math on that was not comfortable." Thrall was on the radio again. The room had changed temperature in some way that had nothing to do with the climate control. The particular drop that came when people who were trained for certain scenarios recognized that they were inside one. Nora looked at the door. She looked at the window. She looked at the waterproof case in her pocket and the note that was folded inside it and the mission that her father had believed, apparently until the end, that she was the right person to finish. She had spent 3 years being the person no one paid attention to, being unremarkable, invisible, filed away as just another ordinary caregiver by men at podiums and colleagues in break rooms and everyone else who had looked at her in the last 36 months and seen only the surface she'd built for herself. She had been very good at it. Now she was standing in a hotel conference room with federal agents and evidence of a conspiracy that had killed 4 of her teammates and destroyed her father, and she had 2 vehicles of unknown personnel positioned outside who were almost certainly not here for the continental breakfast. And she felt, with a clarity that was almost physical, the particular sensation of a life that has been carefully managed coming apart at its seams. "Thrall," she said. "1 second. No." Her voice came out the way it used to, and she didn't bother to moderate it. "We're not waiting. Here's what's going to happen." Thrall looked at her. The radio crackled. Outside, the SUV in the parking structure had begun to move. "Loading dock," Nora said. "East side. Now." Thrall didn't argue, which meant she'd already run the same numbers and arrived at the same place. She signaled her people with 2 fingers, and they were moving before the hand came down. The specific economy of motion that came from teams that had trained together long enough to communicate without full sentences. Nora went to the door first. Not because she had authority here. She didn't, technically. She was a civilian nurse in a ruined blazer with dried blood on her hands. But because she knew this building in a way Thrall's team didn't, having spent 40 minutes walking its perimeter when she arrived the way she always did, the habit so old and automatic she'd stopped noticing it years ago. She knew the second floor had a service corridor running parallel to the main hall, accessed through a supply closet that the hotel staff used for linen transfers. She knew it connected to a back stairwell that deposited you on the east side of the ground floor, behind the kitchen, 20 feet from the loading dock. She also knew that anyone who'd had time to position vehicles at the front and north side had probably not had time to cover the east side comprehensively, because comprehensively covering 4 sides of a structure this size required more personnel than most private security operations wanted to spend on what was supposed to be a quiet retrieval. Supposed to be. The service corridor was narrow and lit with fluorescent tubes that buzzed at a frequency that got inside your back teeth. Nora moved fast, Thrall at her shoulder, the other 3 agents stacked behind them in a line that was close enough for coordinated response and spaced enough that a single contact point wouldn't take them all down. The sound of the ballroom, what was left of it, catering staff and closing out noise, faded behind them and was replaced by the industrial sounds of a hotel's infrastructure, ventilation, refrigeration units, the distant rhythm of a commercial dishwasher. "How confident are you in the east side?" Thrall said, low. "Not very," Nora said, "but more confident than the alternatives." The stairwell door was unlocked. The stairs themselves were concrete, metal-edged, utilitarian, and they went down fast without sound because concrete stairs rewarded soft feet. At the bottom, a fire door. Nora put her hand on it and stopped. 30 seconds, she said. She listened. Loading docks had specific sound profiles. She'd worked enough hospital back entrances to know what a quiet dock sounded like versus an occupied one. The difference in air movement, the particular absence of engine noise, when a space was empty versus the quality of silence that came when an engine had been recently shut off and the metal was still ticking cool. Through the door, she could hear the dock's overhead fan and nothing else. No footsteps. No voices. The refrigeration truck that had been backed up to the kitchen entrance when she'd arrived 4 hours ago was gone. "Okay," she said, and pushed through. The dock was empty. Cold night air, the smell of kitchen exhaust, yellow security lighting that turned everything the color of old paper. 40 feet of concrete platform, 2 roll-up doors, a staircase down to the alley. Thrall's people fanned out in 3 directions in the first 4 seconds, and Nora moved to the platform edge and looked down into the alley. A black SUV was parked at the alley's south entrance, not moving, lights off, the same patient stillness as the one in the parking structure. "North end of the alley," she said, not loudly. One of Thrall's agents, the one she'd heard at the window, whose name she still didn't know, moved to the far edge of the platform and looked. He came back with 3 fingers up. Thrall translated the signal without explaining it. A second vehicle, north end, 3 occupants visible. Boxed. The math was not getting better. "They're not moving," Nora said, "which means they're waiting for something, an instruction, a signal." She looked at Thrall. "Someone on the inside of the building." Thrall's face tightened. Your team swept a building in 11 minutes. That's not a sweep, that's a walkthrough." She wasn't saying it to wound. She was saying it because it was true, and the truth was the most useful thing available. Catering staff, hotel management, anyone who was still in the building when your people arrived. Thrall was already on her radio. Nora moved back from the platform edge and did the thing she did when she was running low on good options, which was to look at what was available rather than what was needed. Loading dock. Hotel kitchen behind them. Commercial vehicle access. The building's east face extended another 60 feet north before the structure cornered. Service entrance for the hotel laundry. She'd seen the signage. That corridor connected, if her read of the building's footprint was right, to the parking structure's pedestrian entrance. The parking structure whose third level now had a moving SUV. The structure has a pedestrian bridge to the hotel's second floor, she said. Thrall looked at her. You want to go toward the vehicle. I want to go through the structure's ground level. The vehicle is on 3. Ground level takes us to the street on the structure's west face, the opposite side from where they're positioned. She paused. If the south vehicle in the alley is watching this dock and the north vehicle is watching the alley's other end, neither of them has line of sight to the structure's west exit. If. Yes. If. She looked at Thrall steadily. You have a better option. I'm listening. Thrall didn't have a better option. You could tell because she stopped generating counter-arguments and started moving, which was the professional version of agreement. They went back through the fire door and north through a secondary corridor that ran behind the kitchen. Nora navigating from memory and spatial inference, checking twice at corners, wrong once and correcting without comment, and came out through a maintenance access door that opened directly into the pedestrian entrance of the parking structure. The entrance was a stairwell with a keypad that the hotel keycard deactivated, which Thrall's credentials handled without breaking stride. Ground level of the structure was mostly empty. A few cars, guess who hadn't retrieved them yet, a hotel staff vehicle, a laundry service van backed into a corner spot. Overhead fluorescents, one of them failing, strobing at irregular intervals that were more disorienting than darkness would have been. The west exit was visible at the far end, a vehicle gate and a pedestrian turnstile, beyond which was a street that Nora had walked twice earlier in the evening and knew connected to the main boulevard 2 blocks north. They moved through in a loose formation, and they were 20 feet from the exit when the elevator at the structure's center opened. 2 men. 2, not hotel guests. The posture was wrong, the clothes were wrong, and one of them had his right hand in his jacket pocket in the way that people kept hands in jacket pockets when they were holding something that didn't belong in a jacket pocket. They registered Nora and Thrall's group in the same instant that Thrall's people registered them, and there was a moment, a fraction of a second, the kind that felt longer when you were inside it, of mutual assessment. Thrall's badge came out. Federal agents, hands. The man on the left put his hands up. The man on the right took a step back toward the elevator. The agent behind Nora, not the window one, the other, broader one who'd been quiet all evening, closed the distance in 3 steps and had the right-hand man's arm behind his back before the elevator doors could close. The left-hand man was cuffed to a support pillar with a zip tie from someone's jacket pocket in about 30 seconds, which was efficient enough that it had clearly been done many times before. The right-hand man, restrained and breathing hard through his nose, looked at Nora. He looked at her specifically, not at Thrall, not at the agents, at her, with the particular recognition of someone who had been given a photograph. "Where is it?" he said. "Where's what?" she said. He didn't answer. The agent holding him applied a mechanical persuasion to his arm angle that produced a sharp exhale, but nothing else. He was trained past the easy pain threshold, which told her something about who was paying him. "Zip tie him and leave him," Thrall said. "We move." "He'll get loose eventually," the window agent said. "He'll get loose in about 40 minutes. We only need 40 minutes. She looked at Nora. "Go." They went. The west exit deposited them onto a side street that was quiet at this hour, late enough that the restaurant foot traffic had thinned, early enough that the bar crowd hadn't spread this far. A black sedan was parked at the corner that Thrall's people moved directly toward, and Nora understood it was their vehicle and that she was expected to get in it, and she did, because the alternatives were worse. They were 6 blocks from the hotel before Thrall spoke again. "We have a staging location. Secure facility, DIA controlled. We get there, we copy the drive and upload the evidence, and we have Rennick in federal custody within 72 hours. She said it with the measured confidence of someone reading from a procedure. You'll be deposed, your testimony recorded, your after-action recollections documented. Then we put you somewhere safe while the legal process— Garrett Mills is at Maplewood Veterans Medical Center, Nora said. Your colleague is handling— My colleague is a floor nurse who I asked to restrict access to his floor. She's not security. She can't stop two men with federal contractor credentials from walking into that building and doing whatever they came to do. She looked at Thrall. He's in surgery right now. He can't speak for himself. He can't protect whatever he knows that isn't on that drive. Thrall was quiet. How much of the case depends on his testimony specifically? A pause that answered the question before Thrall spoke. Enough. Then we need to get to Maplewood. Voss, the secure facility is where Rennick's people will eventually look, because they know who you are, and they know DIA has been running this investigation, and a DIA safe house is a known quantity to a man with $400 million in contractor relationships. She said it without heat, the way she said things that were inconvenient but accurate. Maplewood is a veterans hospital in the middle of Kellerton, Colorado, and I have worked there for 3 years, and I know every inch of it. And right now, it is also where your only living witness is on a surgical table. Another pause. Longer this time. Drive to Maplewood, Thrall said. The driver adjusted course without comment. Maplewood Veterans Medical Center at 11:47 p.m. looked the way hospitals always looked at night. A reduced version of itself, quieter, the particular held breath quality of an institution that never entirely slept but had throttled down to its essential functions. The parking lot was half empty. The main entrance had the overnight security desk staffed by a guard named Petrov, who Nora had brought coffee to on early shifts more times than she could count, and who looked up when she came through the door with 4 people she'd never brought before and processed the situation with the particular equanimity of a man who had worked hospital security for 14 years. Dr. Reinhold paged, he said. OR2. Your friend is in surgery. Who's been through since 9 p.m.? Petrov checked his log. EMS with the patient, Dr. Reinhold's team, anesthesiologist. He looked at the log more carefully. 2 men at 10:40 who said they were U.S. Marshals. I called upstairs to verify. Nurse Reyes said she hadn't been told to expect anyone, and I held them at the desk. He looked at Nora. They left. Didn't look happy about it. Good man, Nora said. She was through the security door before he finished nodding. The surgical floor was on the 3rd level. Donna was in the family waiting area outside OR2, still in her gala dress with a hospital cardigan pulled over it, holding a cup of coffee she'd clearly stopped drinking an hour ago. She stood up when Nora came in and took in the group behind her and said, I have so many questions. I know. Nora put a hand on her arm briefly. Later. How's he doing? Dr. Reinhold says the femoral nick is handled. The abdominal wound is the complicated part. He's been in there 90 minutes. She paused. Reinhold is good. He's going to be okay. Those 2 men who tried to come up, I know, Petrov called me. I've got the overnight charge nurse logging every person who comes onto this floor. She looked at Nora with the specific expression she got when she'd put more pieces together than Nora had intended her to. This is a lot bigger than a stabbing, isn't it? Yes. Okay. Donna sat back down. I'll stay here. Thrall was already on the phone, positioned in the corridor outside, her voice low and continuous. The 2 agents had gone to opposite ends of the floor. Nora tracked them without appearing to, and the window agent was talking to the overnight floor nurse in a way that was going to produce either cooperation or confusion, depending on the nurse's disposition. Nora found the family waiting room's corner chair, back to the wall, sightline to the OR doors and the corridor entrance, and sat down. She was tired. Not the ordinary end-of-shift tired that she managed with coffee and stubbornness, but the specific exhaustion that came from adrenaline burning out of a system that had been running on it for 3 hours, leaving behind the raw material of everything she'd been not thinking about while she was moving. Her father's handwriting on a torn piece of paper. Finish the mission. Garrett Mills looking at her across the marble floor with 11 days of damage on his body and a waterproof case he'd been willing to die for. She took the note out of the case and read it again. Once, slowly, which she hadn't allowed herself in the hotel conference room. I'm sorry I couldn't come myself. He had known he wasn't coming. He had known when he sent Mills that he was making the last move he had available, in a game he'd been playing without telling her, trying to protect her from the consequences of his own decisions. She was angry about that. She was also aware, with the clarity that 3 years of thinking about her father's death had given her, that his decision to keep her out of it had probably kept her alive, because if she'd known what he was building, she would have inserted herself, and the two of them together would have been a more visible target than one dying man handing a drive to an old friend. He had protected her by making her ignorant, which was the most him thing he could have possibly done. She folded the note carefully and put it back. Thrall came in 20 minutes later, phone still in hand, and sat down across from her. "I've been on with the office director. We're getting an FBI joint task force spun up. There's already a federal warrant process initiated for Rennick. The timeline is tighter than 72 hours now." The two men who were here at 10:40 used credentials that traced back to a security contractor with known ties to Rennick's current entity. "That gives us a direct line." "Attempted witness intimidation," Nora said. "At minimum. Potentially obstruction, depending on what they were instructed to do if they'd gotten through." Thrall looked at her. "We're going to get him. I want you to know that. The evidence is strong enough. Mill's testimony will make it ironclad. But even without—" "I know," Nora said. "That's not what I'm thinking about right now." Thrall waited. "My team," Nora said. "The 4 who died. Their families received official findings of operator error. Those findings are in their records, in their benefits documentation. Their families." She stopped, started again. "One of them had a daughter in middle school at the time. She would be in high school now. She grew up knowing her father died because of a mistake his unit made." Thrall's expression changed into something that didn't have a clean name. "Those findings get corrected," she said. "When this processes, all of it, formally, publicly, every record, every family notification." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Thrall said. "That's part of what we're correcting. It's in the scope. I want that in writing before I sign anything. You'll have it." The OR doors opened at 12:23 a.m., and Dr. Reinhold came out in scrubs with his mask pulled down, and the look on his face was the specific look of a surgeon who was tired and had done difficult work, and the work had gone as well as difficult work went, when you were good at your job and lucky, and the patient was stubborn enough to want to live. "He's stable," Reinhold said. "Femoral repair held." Boom, Reinhold. "The abdominal injury was a through and through that caught the lower edge of the liver. We managed the bleed, placed a drain. He's going to need 2 more surgeries over the next week, but tonight he's past the acute window." He looked at Nora. "He was conscious for about 40 seconds before anesthesia. He asked if you were here." "What did you tell him?" "That I had no idea who he was talking about." A pause, and then a small, exhausted, almost smile. "He said she'll be here." "So?" Nora nodded. She sat back in the corner chair and looked at the OR doors and felt the tension in her shoulders reconfigure slightly. Not release, not yet, but change shape. Garrett was past the acute window. The drive was in federal hands. The warrant process was running. These were facts, and facts were the most reliable things she had. It was 20 minutes later when Thrall was back on the phone and Donna had fallen asleep in her chair with the cardigan pulled over her like a blanket, and the corridor had settled into the deep quiet of a hospital floor at 1 a.m, that Nora's own phone buzzed. Unknown number. Not the same area code as Thrall's call. Different prefix entirely. She didn't recognize it, which was itself information, because she had a careful mental map of the area codes she'd been avoiding. She picked up. Silence. Then a man's voice she had never heard before, carrying the specific quality of someone who was accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around his presence and had never found a reason to consider whether that was earned. "Ms. Voss," he said, "I think it's time we spoke directly." She said nothing. "My people tell me you've been a busy woman tonight." A pause. And something in the pause had the texture of patience. Not the patience of someone who was calm, but the patience of someone who had decided that calm was the most effective tool available. "I admire the initiative. Your father had it too." Her hand tightened on the phone by 1 degree. "I want you to understand something," the voice said. "What you have on that drive is one version of events, one framing. The people telling you what it means have their own interests, and those interests don't necessarily align with yours." Another pause. I can offer you something they can't. Clarity. The full picture. Sit down with me. Just a conversation. And I'll tell you things about your father's final year that the DIA is never going to volunteer. You're Warren Rennick, she said. A beat. I am. You called me on a number I've never given anyone. I have very good researchers. She looked at the OR doors, at Donna's sleeping form, at the corridor where Thrall's agents were positioned at both ends, neither of them watching her because neither of them had reason to think this particular variable was in play. What do you want? She said. I want the drive, Rennick said, and I want you to walk away from this, the way you walked away 3 years ago. You built a quiet life. I respect that. It took discipline. His voice remained even throughout, which was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. I'm giving you the opportunity to keep it. Or the people I have currently positioned around Maplewood Veterans Medical Center, 4 teams, Ms. Voss, which I'm sure your federal friends will want to know about, will do what they were sent to do. A pause. I don't want that outcome. It's inefficient. But I will not allow this to go forward. She didn't move, didn't look toward Thrall, kept her voice at the same flat register she used for everything. Give me an hour, she said. A silence. 1 hour. I'll call this number. Yes, Rennick said. You will. The line went dead. She lowered the phone to her lap. 4 teams, around this building, around a surgical floor with a sedated witness, 2 federal agents, a sleeping floor nurse in a gala dress, and 37 veterans who were patients on the floors below, none of whom had anything to do with any of this, and all of whom were here because this was the place that was supposed to take care of them. She stood up. Thrall was still on the phone in the corridor. Nora walked to the doorway and waited, not interrupting, just present, in the particular way that communicated without words that something had changed and the conversation on the phone needed to end. Thrall read it in under 5 seconds and wrapped up the call. What? She said. Rennick just called me directly. She watched Thrall's face go through something. He has 4 teams positioned around this building. He gave me 1 hour. How did he? He has researchers. That's not the immediate problem. She looked at Thrall steadily. He's not going to wait a full hour. He said an hour because it's what people say when they want the other person to feel like they have time to think. He's going to move the moment he believes I'm not going to cooperate. I'm calling this in right now. We can have... How long to get additional personnel here? Thrall's jaw tightened. 40 minutes minimum. Kellerton field office is limited. He'll move in 20. She looked down the corridor toward the nurse's station, then back at Thrall. I know this building. Your people don't. She held Thrall's gaze. Let me help. Thrall stared at her for a long moment. The look of a federal agent calculating risk against necessity, against the particular variable of a woman who had just spent 3 years being a trauma nurse and before that had done things Thrall's file on her only partially captured. What are you thinking? Thrall said. Nora looked at the floor plan in her head. 3rd floor. 4 access points. 2 elevators, 1 service elevator, the main stairwell, and the fire escape on the building's north face. The nursing station was positioned with sight lines to the elevator bank, but not the stairwell. The supply rooms were... She mapped them, one by one, and felt the pieces arranging themselves with the familiar click of a problem that had parameters and therefore had solutions. I'm thinking that 4 teams is a lot of personnel for a quiet retrieval, she said, which means he's not planning a quiet retrieval anymore. She looked at Thrall. He's planning to make sure there's nothing left to retrieve. The building's fire alarm panel was at the end of the corridor. She was already walking toward it when the lights went out. The emergency lighting kicked in 3 seconds after the main power died. Battery-backed fluorescence that ran at about 40% of normal output, casting the corridor in a flat yellow that made everything look like an old photograph. 3 seconds was enough time for Nora to cover the distance to the fire alarm panel, and she had her hand on the manual pull before the backup lights finished warming up. She stopped. Pulling it would evacuate the building. Evacuating the building meant moving 37 patients, some of them non-ambulatory, some of them on monitored systems, one of them on the surgical table in OR2 with an open drain and a liver repair less than an hour old, into a parking lot at 1 in the morning where 4 teams of Rennick's people were positioned and waiting. She took her hand off the pull. "Stairwell," she said to Thrall, who was already moving. "They'll take the elevators. Elevators are on emergency power, but they're slow and they're boxes. Anyone coming up tactically uses the stairs." "Agreed." Thrall was on a radio, tight and fast, pulling her people in from the corridor ends. "What's the stairwell configuration?" "Main stair is at the south end, directly accessible from the lobby. Service stair is north, keycard access below 3, but the door at 3 is always propped. Staff use it for supply runs." She was moving while she talked, not toward the stairs, but toward the nurse's station. "Give me 30 seconds. "Voss?" She was already behind the desk. The charge nurse on overnights was a man named Stu Brieger, 51 years old, 18 years at Maplewood, the kind of nurse who had seen enough in his career that his baseline for alarming situations was considerably higher than most people's. He was standing at the station with his arms crossed and his expression suggesting he was annoyed rather than frightened, which was accurate to his character. "Power's been cut," Nora said. "Not a system failure, someone cut it externally." Stu looked at her. "The people in the building? That's why I'm here. I need you to do 2 things right now. First, move every ambulatory patient on this floor to the interior rooms, away from windows and the corridor. Tell them it's a routine power drill. Don't explain more than that." She stopped. "Second, Dr. Reinhold needs to know that OR2 stays closed and locked until I personally come to that door. Nobody in or out. You understand?" Reinhold's going to ask why. "Tell him a federal agent will be at the door in 60 seconds and the why will become apparent." She looked at him directly. "Stu, these are real people coming into this building. Do you understand what I'm saying?" He uncrossed his arms. "Yeah," he said, "I do." And he picked up the internal phone. She trusted Stu. More than she trusted most people, actually, because 18 years of overnight nursing shifts produced a specific kind of person. Someone who made fast decisions without complete information and lived with the consequences, which was a skill set that was undervalued in most contexts and extremely valuable in this one. Thrall's window agent, she'd learned his name in the car, Decker, had taken position at the south stairwell door with his back to the wall and his hand inside his jacket. The other agent, Marsh, was at the north service stair, same configuration. Thrall herself was in the corridor's center, managing the radio, pulling information from wherever her outside personnel were and processing it faster than Nora could track from the fragments she overheard. "South team is at the main entrance," Thrall said. "They have 3 men trying to talk their way past lobby security using federal contractor credentials. Petrov won't let them through without a call to verify. They're not going to wait for verification much longer." A pause, radio crackle. "North side has 2 men at the ambulance bay. East side..." She stopped. "East side is quiet." "East side is where I'd come from," Nora said. Thrall looked at her. "If I'm running this, 2 loud entries at the south and north to pull attention, real entry from the east." She moved to the window at the corridor's east-facing end and looked down at the parking lot. From 3 floors up, in reduced light, she could see the ambulance bay directly below. 2 men visible, standing with the patient stillness of people who were waiting for something. The east parking lot beyond them looked empty. Looked. "The east stairwell," she said. "Is there one?" "This wing doesn't have..." She stopped, because she was wrong, and she knew it before she finished the sentence. The east wing had been a renovation addition, finished 18 months ago, and the renovation had included a secondary egress stair that connected to the new outpatient clinic section. She hadn't used it in months. "There is one. It's the clinic annex stair. It opens on 3 through a connecting corridor behind radiology." She was moving before she finished saying it. The connecting corridor behind radiology was 120 feet of linoleum flooring that smelled like developer fluid and machinery, and connected the main nursing wing to the clinic annex through a door that was supposed to be locked after clinic hours. It was locked. Nora used her badge, which still had full facility access because she was a staff nurse and no one had any reason to restrict her, and the lock clicked and she pushed through. The annex corridor was dark, not emergency lit, because this section ran on a separate circuit that had apparently not transferred to backup, which meant someone cutting the power had known the facility's electrical layout. That was a specific kind of knowledge. That was not improvised. She stood still in the dark for 5 seconds, letting her eyes adjust. The annex stairwell door was at the far end, 50 feet. She could see its outline because of the green exit sign above it, battery-powered, throwing just enough light to define the door's frame and the small window set into it at head height. As she watched, that window went dark for half a second, something passing on the other side, and then light again. She went back through the radiology corridor, let the door close quietly behind her, and walked quickly back to Thrall. "They're already in the annex stair," she said. "Coming up." Thrall's face did something compressed and controlled. "How many?" "Couldn't see. At least one, probably more." She looked at the radiology corridor door. "That stair comes out directly into the annex section, which connects to this corridor through the badge access door I just came through. They'll need to breach it, or they'll need a card." "Can they breach it?" "It's a standard hospital interior door. A motivated person with a pry bar takes it in under a minute." She paused. "Or they have a copied card." "How would they have a copied—" Thrall stopped herself, which meant she'd run the answer before finishing the question. Rennick had researchers. Rennick had contractor relationships with companies that built security systems. Maplewood's badge system was not classified infrastructure. "Okay, we assume they have access, which means that door opens in whatever time it takes them to climb 3 floors, which is about 90 seconds from when I saw them." Thrall pulled Decker off the south stairwell door and repositioned him at the radiology corridor entrance. One agent covering a potential breach point, Marsh still at the north stair, Thrall managing the whole board. It was thin, very thin. 2 agents in a building with 4 entry vectors and a target they couldn't move. Nora looked at the nurses' station, at the supply rooms to the left, at the layout of this floor that she had walked 5 days a week for 3 years, that she knew the way she knew her own hands, that had become so familiar she'd stopped seeing it and was now seeing it again for the first time in the specific way of someone cataloging resources. The supply room had a crash cart. It had IV poles. It had the kind of equipment that, in a civilian context, had one purpose, and in a different context could be repurposed quickly by someone who had spent years operating in environments where the available tools were never quite the right tools. She went to the supply room. Stu appeared at her elbow. "Patients are moved. Reinholdt's got the OR locked. He's not happy." "He doesn't need to be happy. He needs to stay put." She was moving things, pulling open drawers, running inventory. "Are there any off-duty security on the floor right now? Anyone who came in early?" "Petrov's got a second guard on the overnight now. Guy named Vargas. He's been here an hour." "Get Vargas up here. Tell him to bring the baton and the radio and leave the desk to Petrov." She looked at Stu. "And then I need you to go to the medication room, lock yourself in, and not come out until you hear my voice, or Donna's voice. Nobody else." Stu looked at what she was pulling out of the supply cabinet. He looked at her. "You're not just a nurse," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I'm absolutely a nurse," she said. "I'm also other things." She met his eyes. "Go." He went. What she built in the next 4 minutes was not elegant. Elegant was for situations where you had time and materials and the luxury of refinement. This was functional. 2 positions using the corridor's geometry to create a predictable flow. IV poles repositioned to limit lateral movement in the section outside the radiology door. The crash cart moved to a specific location that made tactical sense for reasons that had nothing to do with cardiac emergencies. She worked from the logic of confined spaces and limited sight lines and the particular vulnerability of people who were moving through an unfamiliar environment in the dark, which was that unfamiliar environments in the dark made people cautious. And cautious people were slower than they needed to be. She also pulled 2 syringes from the medication drawer, both filled, both documented, both things she had legal authority to administer, and put them in her scrub pocket, not as weapons, as the things she was actually trained to use. The radiology door opened at 1:43 a.m. She heard it rather than saw it. The specific sound of a door that had been opened carefully by someone who understood that sound, discipline mattered. 2 figures, moving low, wearing dark clothing and the kind of earpieces that were commercially available to anyone who wanted them. Not military. She could see it in the way they moved, Technically trained, but not the particular efficiency of people who'd done this under actual fire. Private security. Good private security, but private. Decker was in position at the corridor junction. She was 6 feet behind him, in the shadow of the nurse's station overhang. The first figure came around the corner and stopped when he saw Decker. "Federal agent," Decker said, and his voice was absolutely level. "On the ground now." The figure did not go to the ground. He took a step back and said something into his earpiece, and Nora registered 2 things simultaneously. The second figure was not where she'd expected him to be, and from the south stairwell, the one Decker had been pulled off 20 minutes ago, she heard the door bang open. They'd timed it. The annex entry was a distraction. She moved. Not toward the south stairwell, toward the junction point, the place where the south corridor met the east corridor, because that was where the second annex figure had gone, and because 2 simultaneous entries only worked if the second one had a clear run to the target, which meant the second man was heading for OR 2 directly. She came around the corner and he was there, 8 feet ahead of her, moving fast toward the OR doors. "Stop," she said. He didn't. She caught him at the OR entrance. Not by speed, she wasn't faster than him, but because she knew the floor and he didn't, and she took a line through the supply alcove that cut 4 feet off the distance, and she hit him from the left at an angle that wasn't designed to hurt him, but to redirect. The way you deflected rather than blocked when the person you were dealing with outweighed you by 40 pounds. He went into the wall and she used the rebound to get his right arm, and there was a scrambling, ugly 30 seconds against the OR door that she won. Not because she was stronger, but because she was in a space she knew, and he was in a space he didn't, and she'd been trained by people who taught you to use both of those facts. He ended up on the floor with his face against the linoleum and her knee in his back, which was not a position she could maintain indefinitely, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. "Nora," Thrall's voice down the corridor. "We've got the south entry contained. Marsh has 2 down." "I need someone at this location right now," she said, and her voice was even because she was choosing to make it even, and not for any other reason. Marsh came at a run and took her position, and she stood up and her hands were shaking slightly, which she noticed and filed away as something to deal with later. The tremor was adrenaline, not fear, but the distinction didn't matter much to her nervous system. The corridor settled. It took 12 minutes. That was how long it took for the situation on the 3rd floor of Maplewood Veterans Medical Center to go from active threat to contained, which was not a word she would have used with full confidence at the 8-minute mark, but became accurate by the 12. 3 of Rennick's people were restrained. The south stairwell team, 2 men, had been met by Decker and Marsh together once the east threat was neutralized. The lobby team had not made it past Petrov and Vargas, who had apparently been more effective than anyone had planned for, Petrov having spent 14 years developing a specific talent for making people understand that they were not getting through his desk. Thrall was on the phone continuously for the following 20 minutes. Nora sat on the floor of the corridor with her back against the wall outside OR2, not out of defeat, just because it was available and she was tired, and listened to the building reassemble itself around the crisis. She could hear Stu's voice from somewhere, calm and professional, the sound of a hospital floor returning to its operating parameters. Donna appeared from the waiting room, took in the scene with wide eyes, and sat down on the floor next to Nora without asking permission or explanation. They sat together for a while without talking. "The gala feels like it was a week ago," Donna said finally. "It was 4 hours ago." "That's not possible." "I know." Donna looked at the people restrained at the corridor junction, at Thrall's agents, at Nora's hands, which had stopped shaking. "Are you okay?" "I don't know yet," Nora said. "Ask me in a day or 2. Donna nodded as though this was a reasonable and satisfying answer, which said something about Donna. The FBI arrived at 2:17 a.m., not the Kellerton Field contingent, which would have taken longer, but a rapid response team out of Denver that Thrall had apparently mobilized during the hotel phase and that had been driving for the past 90 minutes. They were professional and thorough, and they processed the scene with the specific efficiency of people who were very good at the administrative dimensions of violence, which was what law enforcement mostly was when you stripped away the dramatic framing. Nora gave a preliminary statement to an agent named Farrow, who had the careful listening posture of someone trained to hear not just what people said, but what they organized their saying around. She was precise and chronological and left out nothing of operational relevance, and Farrow wrote all of it down and thanked her and said someone would be back in the morning for a full formal deposition. Warren Rennick, she learned from Thrall at 2:55 a.m., had attempted to leave his hotel in Arlington, Virginia at 2:31 a.m. local time, which was 12 minutes after the situation at Maplewood was called contained and approximately the moment he would have received communication that his operation had failed. The FBI field office in Arlington had been positioned outside his hotel since midnight based on Thrall's warrant escalation, and Rennick had walked into their presence in the lobby carrying a go bag and wearing the specific expression of a man who had spent 20 years believing he was several moves ahead of every situation and was encountering, for the first time, a situation that had moved faster than he had. "He's in federal custody," Thrall said. "Arlington field office. The warrant covers the conspiracy charges. What's on the drive plus the obstruction from tonight adds the attempted witness intimidation. His lawyers will be very good and very expensive and will ultimately not be good enough." Thrall said it without satisfaction, just factually, the way she said most things. "The documentation is extensive, 14 months of investigative work plus what Mills brought in. Rennick's companies will be subpoenaed. His communications, every contractor relationship that touches the original mission timeline." She paused. "This doesn't end tonight, but tonight is when it ends for him." Nora was quiet for a moment. "The men he sent here, do they talk?" "Private security contractors talking about their clients is the rule, not the exception, when the alternative is federal conspiracy charges." Thrall allowed something that was the nearest thing to dry that her expression did. "They'll talk." Down the corridor, Stu was moving patients back to their rooms, his voice carrying the particular cadence of someone managing 16 small reassurances simultaneously. From behind the OR 2 doors, she could hear the quiet sounds of a post-surgical recovery being managed. Monitors, the soft professional exchange of the recovery team. Garrett Mills was somewhere past those doors, sedated, stable, alive. She had a thought that was small and not particularly dramatic, standing in that corridor at 3 in the morning, and it was this. The 4 names she had been carrying for 3 years, Sergeant Alicia Drummond, Corporal James Okafor, Specialist Trey Winslow, Sergeant First Class Paul Nakamura, were going to be carried differently now. Not less, but differently. Because the finding that had defined their deaths was going to be corrected in writing by the United States government, and the man responsible for the thing that killed them was going to stand in a federal courtroom and be asked to answer for it. That wasn't enough. It wasn't the thing she would have asked for if asking had been an option, but it was the thing that was available, and the thing that was available was what you worked with. She pushed herself up from the floor. Thrall was watching her. "We're going to need the full deposition tomorrow. Today." She corrected herself. It was past 3, technically morning. "You should try to rest." "I have a 6 a.m. shift." Thrall stared at her. "You're not serious." "My patients don't know what happened tonight." She looked down the corridor at Stu, at the doors of the rooms where 37 veterans were trying to sleep through the residual disruption of the last 2 hours. "They know the power went out, and there was some kind of incident. They don't know what kind." She paused. "They need their morning nurse." Thrall looked at her for a long moment, with an expression that had moved somewhere past professional assessment into something more personal, though she managed it with the same contained quality she managed everything. "I'll have an agent here," Thrall said. "On the floor, all day." "I know." "The deposition at 2 p.m., Nora said. "I'll be there." She went to find the break room, because the break room had a couch that was uncomfortable in a specific way she knew from 2 years of overnight on-calls, and 2 hours of uncomfortable sleep was better than no sleep, and she had 4 names to carry correctly in the morning. She was almost at the break room door when her phone buzzed. Not a call. A text, from the number Rennick had used, which meant it had been sent before his arrest, queued, possibly, or sent by someone on his behalf in the window between the operation's failure and his attempt to leave the hotel. She opened it. It was 4 words and a file attachment. "He wasn't alone, Nora." She stared at the words for 3 seconds, then opened the attachment. It was a photograph. Grainy, the resolution of a security camera, time-stamped 14 months ago. Two men in the lobby of what appeared to be a federal building, talking. Unremarkable in the way that two men talking in a lobby always appeared unremarkable until you knew who one of them was. She knew who one of them was. She looked at the other one for a long time. Then she looked up, down the corridor, at the FBI agent named Farrow, who was still managing the scene with his careful listening posture and his thorough notes, and she thought about Thrall on the phone for the last 2 hours, coordinating, directing, managing the board. Every move calibrated, every decision landing exactly right, including the decision to position Rennick's arrest team only after Maplewood was contained, including the decision not to move on Rennick in the 6 days since they'd had actionable evidence, waiting instead for the drive, waiting specifically for Mills to reach Kellerton, waiting for Nora. She looked at the photograph again, the second man in the lobby, 14 months ago, standing with Warren Rennick in what the timestamp placed as 3 days before the investigation. Thrall had described began, was someone she recognized, and the recognition felt like the floor shifting under her feet by 1 degree, just enough to feel, not enough to fall. She closed the photo. She put the phone in her pocket. She walked back down the corridor slowly toward the place where Thrall was standing with her radio and her careful face and her 14 months of investigative work. And she thought about 4 dead teammates and a father who had died building a case and an 11-day journey that Garrett Mills had nearly not survived, and a drive that had passed through 3 pairs of hands tonight before reaching federal custody. Whose federal custody, exactly? And who had known, with enough precision to position correctly at every turn, where that drive was going to be? She did not go back to Thrall immediately. That was the decision she made in the 10 seconds she stood in the corridor, with the phone in her pocket and the photograph in her head. Not yet, not without thinking it through, not without being certain about what she was looking at and what it meant, and what the right move was when the wrong move could collapse everything that had been built tonight. She was tired. She was aware of being tired in the way you became aware of it when the adrenaline fully exited your system and left nothing behind to run on but the bare mechanics of decision-making. Tired people made assumptions. Tired people saw patterns that weren't there or failed to see patterns that were, depending on which direction their exhaustion bent them. She went to the break room. She sat on the uncomfortable couch. She took out her phone and opened the photograph again. The timestamp was 14 months ago. The location was a federal building lobby. She could tell from the security desk visible in the background and the style of the ID badge readers on the wall. The two men were not standing the way strangers stood. They were turned toward each other with the fractional ease of people who had met in this particular place before, whose comfort with each other was not performed. One of them was Warren Rennick. She was certain of that. She had looked at his face in contractor documentation and DOD hearing records often enough in the past 3 hours to be confident. The other one. She looked at the face for a long time. She had looked at that face across a conference table in a hotel ballroom and a hospital corridor tonight. She had made decisions based on that face's reactions. She had read that face for honesty the way she read everything, with the trained attentiveness of someone who had spent years in environments where reading people wrong had consequences. She had not seen deception. She had seen competence and containment and the particular closed quality of someone who was very good at her job. But she was also aware, sitting on this couch at 3 a.m, that not seeing deception was not the same as deception not being there. The best deceptions were the ones that looked exactly like competence. The best operators were the ones who never let you see the seam. The problem was that the photograph proved proximity, not conspiracy. 2 people standing in a federal building lobby 14 months ago proved that they had been in the same place at the same time, which could mean many things. Rennick moved in DOD contractor circles. Thrall worked for an agency that operated in those same circles. An incidental meeting in a shared professional space was not evidence of coordination. But Rennick had sent her this. Specifically, her. And Rennick was not a man who did things without purpose. She thought about that for 60 seconds. He'd sent it as a destabilization move. That was the most logical reading. His operation had failed, his people were restrained, he was about to be arrested, and his last move was to plant doubt, to give Nora a reason to question the people who were now holding the evidence and running the investigation, to create confusion that might slow the process or corrupt the chain of custody or produce the kind of internal federal dispute that defense attorneys loved. That was what it was. Probably. She put the phone down and looked at the ceiling. The ceiling was institutional white, slightly water-stained in one corner from a pipe issue that maintenance had patched but not repainted. She had looked at this ceiling many times. She knew this ceiling. She was in a place she knew, and she had spent 3 years learning to trust the things she knew. What she knew about Thrall, she had legitimate DIA credentials. Her people had handled the hotel extraction efficiently. The warrant on Rennick had processed correctly. The FBI Rapid Response Team had come from Denver on her mobilization, which required real authority and real pre-existing relationships. Those were not things you faked in an evening. What she knew about Rennick, he had spent 2 decades managing information and managing people, and managing the space between what was true and what was documented. He was very good at it. He was also, as of approximately 2:30 a.m., in federal custody. She picked up the phone again, and she did something that felt slow, but was probably right. She called the number Thrall had used when she first contacted her tonight. Not the radio, the direct line. Thrall picked up in 2 rings. "I need to show you something," Nora said. "I'm 30 feet away." "I know. I need you to come here." A pause. Then, "On my way." Thrall came through the break room door 20 seconds later and looked at Nora on the couch, and then at the phone Nora was holding out toward her, the photograph open on the screen. Thrall looked at it. Her face did something that was not the thing Nora had been half-braced for. Not guilt, not calculation, not the fractional reorientation of someone caught. It did something that looked like recognition of a different kind. The specific look of someone who has been waiting for a particular shoe to drop and has just heard it. "He sent you this," Thrall said, "in the window before his arrest." Thrall sat down in the chair across from the couch. She looked at the photograph for another moment, then handed the phone back. "That's from the lobby of the Kellerman building, and DC DIA offices are on floors 4 through 7. She paused. Rennick met with a government liaison 3 times in a 14-month period to discuss contract renewal for his primary entity. Standard DOD contractor process. I was the liaison. Nora looked at her. "I know how that reads," Thrall said. "I know exactly how he intended it to read." She held Nora's gaze with the steadiness of someone who was not going to look away from this, which was itself a data point. "When I was assigned as his liaison, the investigation hadn't started yet. I was processing a routine renewal. 4 months in, I found a discrepancy in the financial documentation that didn't match the project reports. That discrepancy is what started the investigation." She stopped. "I am in that photograph because I was doing my job. The job that eventually built the case that put him in federal custody tonight." Nora sat with that for a moment. "He's had that photograph for 14 months, she said. "Yes. He's been waiting to use it. He knew I was the investigator. He's known for a while. He's been too careful for us to prove he knew, but the photograph was his insurance, his way of muddying the water if the case ever came to trial." A pause. "He sent it to you because you're the person whose doubt does the most damage. Your testimony, your credibility. If you walked into that deposition uncertain about the integrity of the investigation, his lawyers would have something to work with." Nora turned the phone over in her hands. "You should have told me you'd met with him." "Yes," Thrall said, and the simplicity of it landed with more weight than a justification would have. "I should have. I was going to in the full briefing. That's not an excuse, it's just what was true." She folded her hands in her lap. "I understand if you want to request an independent oversight agent for your deposition. That's your right, and I'll support the request." Nora looked at her. The thing about deception was that it was usually more elaborate than this. The thing about guilty people was that they tended to explain. Thrall was sitting in a break room at 3 in the morning offering to undermine her own position, which was either the most sophisticated manipulation Nora had ever encountered or was what it appeared to be. A woman who had made a procedural error in transparency and was unwilling to compound it. "No," Nora said. "I don't want an independent agent." She put the phone away. "But I want the full briefing, everything, before 2 p.m. You'll have it. Nora nodded once. That was the end of that. Not because it was fully resolved, trust was not a thing you reassembled in 5 minutes in a hospital break room, but because the alternative was paralysis, and paralysis was not something she'd ever been able to afford. Get some sleep, Thrall said, standing. Even an hour. I was planning to. Thrall paused at the door. She looked back with the expression of someone who had something to say that was going to cost her something to say. Your father's file notes describe you as the most mission-capable individual he worked with in 22 years of service. She stopped. I met him once, briefly, at the start of the investigation before he got sick. Another stop. He talked about you for 10 minutes without me asking. I want you to know that. She left before Nora could respond, which might have been intentional. Nora lay down on the uncomfortable couch, which she knew from experience had a spring that pressed into the left shoulder blade if you positioned wrong, and she positioned wrong anyway because she was too tired to adjust, and she closed her eyes. She did not sleep much, but she slept. The deposition took 4 hours. It was conducted in a conference room at the Kellerton FBI field office that smelled like commercial carpet cleaning solution and recycled air, and Farrow was there, and 2 attorneys from the DOJ's National Security Division who had flown in from Denver that morning, and a DIA oversight officer who was not Thrall and who asked precise questions in a precise sequence that suggested he had read the case file very thoroughly before arriving. Nora answered everything. She answered the questions about the mission parameters, about the communications she'd received in the 48 hours before deployment, about the coordinates that had been off, about the support they'd been promised, and the silence that had met them instead. She answered questions about the after-action process, about the findings she'd been presented with and the objections she'd raised, and the way those objections had been managed out of the official record. She answered questions about the 4 people she'd served with who hadn't come home, and about what she'd been told regarding their deaths, and about what she had believed for 3 years that she carried a share of responsibility for. That last part she answered in the same flat register she used for everything, and no one in the room commented on it, which was the right call. When she was done, one of the DOJ attorneys, a woman named Hartley, who had the particular focused energy of someone who had been working this case from a different angle and was now seeing it from above for the first time, said, "Your testimony is consistent with the documentary evidence on every point. In several places it explains gaps in the documentation that we hadn't been able to account for." The gaps were intentional, Nora said. Someone edited the communication logs post-mission. There were references in the pre-deployment briefing to a secondary exfil route that disappeared from the final record. I noticed at the time. I was told it was a transcription correction. Hartley wrote something down. We'll need you to elaborate on that in a follow-up session. Schedule it? She was outside the field office at 6:12 p.m. in the thin gold light of a Colorado late afternoon, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment doing nothing in particular, just existing in a space that was outdoors and quiet and not requiring anything of her. Her phone rang. It was a Denver number she didn't know, and she picked it up because she was picking up unknown numbers now. Apparently that was the thing she was doing. Ms. Voss. A man's voice, formal but not official. The cadence of someone who had once been official and retained the habits. My name is General Albert Morse, retired. I served with your father for 11 years. A pause. I understand last night was significant. That's one word for it. I've been in contact with the DIA oversight team this morning. I wanted to call personally. He stopped. What your father built, the case, the documentation, the network of people who helped him build it, it was extraordinary work for a man in his condition. He did it methodically, over 2 years, without institutional support. Another pause. He did it for your unit, and for you. She was quiet. There's going to be a formal process, Morse said. Corrections to the official finding, notifications to the families. It won't happen in a week. These things move through channels, and the channels are slow. But I want you to hear from someone who knew him that it will happen. He made me promise to make sure someone said that to you directly. She looked at the sidewalk, at the concrete, which was cracked near the curb in a specific pattern she'd probably walked over 100 times without noticing. Thank you, General, she said. He was proud of you, Morse said. I know he didn't say it enough. He told me that too. She thanked him again and ended the call and stood on the sidewalk for another 90 seconds, and then she straightened up and walked to her car. The federal charges against Warren Rennick were filed publicly 11 days later. She read them on her phone during a break between patients, not because she'd been waiting for them exactly, but because Hartley had texted her a one-line message that said, "Public filing today, check the DOJ press release." And she read the press release twice in the break room at Maplewood, with her coffee going cold on the counter beside her. The charges were specific and numerous: conspiracy to commit fraud against the United States, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, procurement fraud across 7 separate contracts with the Department of Defense totaling, according to the filing, $412 million over 8 years, aiding and abetting the wrongful death of 4 United States military personnel through the deliberate compromise of a covert operational mission in which he had been granted access to planning systems through his contractor relationship. That last one was the one she read 3 times. Wrongful death, not operator error. Not a training accident, not a classified finding that put the weight on the people who'd been sent into a situation that had been quietly rigged against them. Wrongful death, with a named responsible party, filed in federal court on public record. Alicia Drummond, James Okafor, Trey Winslow, Paul Nakamura. She said their names quietly in the break room, which she had never done at Maplewood before. She had kept those names in the private interior, the part of her that she had been very careful not to bring to work, not because they didn't belong in her life here, but because she hadn't known how to carry them here alongside everything else. She said them now. Then she picked up her coffee and went back to the floor. 3 of Rennick's private security contractors, the ones taken at Maplewood the night of the operation, accepted plea agreements within 3 weeks of the filing. Their statements corroborated the documentary evidence on the authorization chain, adding the specific operational details that connected Rennick's instructions to the actions taken. A 4th contractor held out for 6 weeks before his attorney negotiated the same arrangement. Rennick himself maintained his innocence publicly through 2 attorneys and a carefully managed press statement that described the charges as politically motivated and the investigation as procedurally flawed. The press statement circulated for approximately 48 hours before the DOJ released a secondary document detailing the specific authorization codes tied to Rennick's contractor access, cross-referenced with the mission modification logs, cross-referenced with the financial transfers that had moved through the subsidiary company he'd sold in 2014. The secondary document made the press statement look like what it was. After that, his attorneys stopped issuing press statements. Garrett Mills was discharged from Maplewood on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after surgery, walking under his own power with a gait that was careful but functional. Nora was not technically his nurse. He'd been assigned to the surgical recovery team, which was a different floor, but she happened to be in the lobby when he came through it, which was not entirely coincidental. He looked better, thinner than he should have been, with the particular hollowed quality of someone who had lost significant weight through injury rather than choice. But his eyes were clear and his color was back, and he was carrying his own discharge bag, which told her everything she needed to know about his status. He saw her and stopped. They looked at each other for a moment. "You look terrible," she said. "You should see the other guys." He said it without smiling first, and then he smiled, and it was the smile of a man who had been through something and come out the other side with his sense of humor mostly intact. "He talked about you all the time, your father." "So I'm hearing." "He wasn't easy. I want you to know that he wasn't easy to work with. He was stubborn about everything. He didn't sleep enough, and he argued about every decision, and he was usually right, which made it worse." He paused. "But he was the best person I ever worked alongside. And he loved you in the specific way that people love things they're scared of losing, which means he didn't always say it right." She looked at him. "You carried that drive 11 days. He asked me to. You nearly died." "He asked me to," he said again, and the simplicity of it was the whole explanation. She nodded. "Thank you, Garrett." He nodded back. They shook hands, which felt inadequate and was the right thing to do anyway, and he walked out through the lobby doors into the Colorado morning with his discharge bag over one shoulder, and she watched him go. Marcus Hale came to the hospital on a Thursday afternoon, 4 weeks after the gala. He did not call ahead. He came to the reception desk and asked for Nora Voss and was told she was on shift, and he sat in the waiting area for 20 minutes until she had a break long enough to come down. She found him in the lobby chairs looking like a man who had been doing a lot of thinking about something and had not fully resolved it. He stood up when he saw her and then didn't seem sure what to do with his hands, which was a state she had not previously observed Marcus Hale inhabiting. "I'm not here for a story," he said. "I'm not here for content. I want to make that clear." "Okay." "I came to say something that I said badly the first time and that then got—" He stopped. "The situation made my original apology look small, which it was. I called you ordinary in front of 300 people, and I meant it as praise, and it wasn't. It was the laziest thing I could have said to someone I knew nothing about." He paused. "I know more now. I've read the press release. I've read the DOJ filing." Another pause. "I've spent 20 years telling people what courage looks like. I described it from the outside in ways that were true, but not that." He gestured vaguely in the direction of all of it. She looked at him. He was not performing. That was the thing she kept checking for and kept not finding. He was a man who made his living from words, standing in a hospital lobby struggling to find the right ones, and the struggle appeared genuine. "I accept the apology," she said. He exhaled. "I also want to ask, and you can absolutely say no. I have a platform. The podcast. The speaking work. I've been thinking about what I could do that wasn't just talking about what you did, but talking about what the families of your team members have been through. The official finding, what it meant to them for 3 years." He held her gaze. "If any of those families ever wanted a public platform to speak, I would provide it. No editorial control, no shaping it into a narrative I needed. Just their words." She was quiet for a moment. "I can't speak for those families," she said. "That's not my decision to make." "I know. I'm asking if you'd be willing to pass the offer along." She thought about Drummond's daughter, who would be in high school now, about the 3 years she had grown up with a version of her father's death that was about to be publicly corrected, which was better than the alternative and was also its own kind of thing to process, at 17, in public. "I'll pass it along," she said. He nodded. He looked like he might say something else. And then he decided not to, and he thanked her and left. She stood in the lobby for a moment after he went. She thought, that's what reckoning looks like when it's real. Not dramatic, not particularly satisfying, just a person who said a wrong thing and came back to say it better and offered what they had. It didn't undo anything. It also wasn't nothing. The formal correction of the official finding was issued on a federal level 63 days after Rennick's arrest. She received a certified letter at her apartment in Kellerton, which she opened at her kitchen table on a Sunday morning with a cup of coffee and the particular braced feeling of someone opening something they have been waiting for long enough that the waiting has become its own kind of normal. The letter was not warm. Government letters were not warm. They were precise and passive-voiced and moved through their information in the specific sequence that legal documentation required. But the information was there. The official finding of operator error in the incident designating the deaths of Sergeant Alicia Drummond, Corporal James Okafor, Specialist Trey Winslow, and Sergeant First Class Paul Nakamura had been formally vacated. New findings, based on the investigation conducted by the Defense Intelligence Agency in conjunction with the Department of Justice, determined that the mission failure had resulted from deliberate intelligence compromise by an unauthorized third party. The service records of all 4 deceased personnel were to be corrected. Their families were to be notified and provided with revised documentation. Survivor benefit adjustments, where applicable, were to be processed within 90 days. At the bottom, in a paragraph that was formatted identically to everything else but that she read 4 times, the letter noted that the findings regarding the mission also affected the service record of Sergeant First Class Nora Voss, who had resigned her commission following the incident. The circumstances of her separation from service were to be corrected in her official file to reflect that the resignation had occurred under materially false pretenses. She was, if she chose, eligible to request reinstatement review. She set the letter down on the table. She sat with it for a long time. The coffee went cold. Reinstatement. The word sat in the middle of the kitchen in a way she hadn't expected. Not as an obvious answer, not as something she could dismiss immediately, but as a real question that deserved a real answer and was going to require more than a Sunday morning to find. She thought about the OR floor at 2 in the morning, her knee in a man's back, her hands steadier than her legs wanted to be. She thought about Garrett on the marble floor, 4 words, 11 days. She thought about her father's handwriting on a torn piece of notebook paper, finish the mission. The mission, she thought, had many possible meanings. She thought about Stu, who had moved 16 patients into interior rooms in under 8 minutes, because she'd told him to, and he had trusted her. She thought about Donna, sitting on the corridor floor at 3 in the morning asking if she was okay. She thought about Roland from the fundraising video, standing on the running track with prosthetics, grinning at the camera like a man who had decided to enjoy the joke. She thought about what she'd built here, in this quiet city, in these 3 years she'd meant as a hiding place, and that had become, without her entirely noticing, something else. A life that had actual weight in it, patients who knew her name, a floor that ran better when she was on it, not because she was exceptional, but because she showed up consistently and paid attention and did the thing that needed doing without needing it to be recognized, which was, it turned out, the exact same skill set in both of the lives she'd lived. She picked up the letter again. She read the reinstatement paragraph one more time. Then she put the letter carefully on the table, picked up her coffee, discovered it was cold, and went to make a fresh cup. The reinstatement question would get an answer. Not today. Today she had a shift at 2 p.m. and a patient on post-surgical recovery who she wanted to check before the afternoon team came on, and a conversation she'd been meaning to have with the department director about the trauma triage protocols that were, in her professional assessment, 6 months behind where they needed to be. There was work to do. There was always work to do, and the work was real. And the people it served were real, and that had not changed and was not going to change regardless of what her official file said. She was at the door when her phone buzzed. Hartley, from the DOJ Rennick, accepted a plea. Federal sentencing in 90 days, minimum 22 years. All 4 families formally notified this morning. She read it once. She put the phone in her pocket. 22 years. She rolled that number around. It was not everything. It was not the thing that would give Drummond's daughter her father back, or give Okafor's mother the version of her son's service she deserved to have, or give Winslow's wife the 3 years of correct grief she'd been denied. 22 years was what the law had available, and the law was a blunt and imperfect instrument operated by imperfect people in imperfect institutions, and it had still, slowly, through 14 months of one investigator's careful work and 2 years of a dying man's stubborn documentation and 11 days of a stubborn man's bleeding determination, and 1 night of a woman who'd spent 3 years being invisible, finally refusing to be, it had still arrived here, at justice, partial, real, documented, public. She walked to her car. The morning was clear, the Colorado sky doing the specific thing it did in September when the light came at an angle that made everything look like the first day of something. She drove to Maplewood with the windows down and the radio off, and she parked in her usual spot and sat for a moment before she got out. She thought about the person she had been when she came to Kellerton. She had been running, and she had told herself she was recovering, and the distinction had mattered to her at the time. She was less sure the distinction mattered now, because it turned out you could be doing both simultaneously, running from the thing that broke you while slowly, without noticing, building the thing that would eventually hold you. She had built something here. She had not set out to, and it was not the thing she'd imagined, and it was real. She got out of the car. The automatic doors opened as she approached, and the smell of the hospital came to meet her, antiseptic and coffee, and the specific institutional warmth of a place that was heated to accommodate people who were sick and therefore cold. And Petrov was at the desk, and he nodded at her the way he always did, and she nodded back. She went to the locker room. She changed into scrubs. She pulled her hair back the way she always did, efficient and practical, in the small mirror above the sink. She looked at herself for a moment. She was 34 years old. She had done things she was proud of and things she would always carry imperfectly, and things she still didn't fully understand how to classify. She had spent 3 years believing she owed the world her invisibility, and she had been wrong about that. And being wrong about it had cost things she couldn't get back. And she was still here and the work was still real, and that was the only mathematics that currently applied. She was not the person everyone had looked at in that ballroom 6 weeks ago, Small, forgettable, just another ordinary caregiver. And she was also exactly that person, because that person had always been this person, and the only thing that had changed was that she had stopped apologizing for the space between those two versions of herself. She was a trauma nurse at a veterans hospital in Kellerton, Colorado. She was Sergeant First Class Nora Voss, whose service record had been corrected and whose resignation had been acknowledged as coerced, and who had the right, if she chose, to reclaim what had been taken from her. She was her father's daughter, which was not a simple thing and had never been, and was something she would spend a long time still figuring out. She was the woman that Warren Rennick, with 22 years of federal sentencing ahead of him, had fatally underestimated. Not on the night of the gala, but 2 years before that, when he had looked at the case her father was quietly building and decided that the daughter, at least, was not a threat. She put on her badge. She walked out of the locker room and down the corridor toward the nursing station where Stu was finishing the night report and Donna was already there with coffee for both of them. And the morning light was coming through the east-facing windows in long horizontal bars that crossed the linoleum floor all the way to the far wall. She had a patient on post-surgical recovery who needed checking. She had a department director who needed to hear about the triage protocols. She had 4 names she was going to carry differently now, not less but differently. And the difference had been paid for at a cost she did not minimize and was not going to. She had a life that she had built in a city she'd chosen for the wrong reasons and stayed in for the right ones. She went to work.